Hey, everybody, this is Philip Ailes. I am here with Sha Sparks. She is a phenomenal life lessons learned, everything coach to where it's all about you. Uh, I met her through another person on LinkedIn Live, or not LinkedIn Live, but LinkedIn, that said, "Hey, you need to get a hold of this person because she's pretty awesome." And
Mm.
she goes along and she has a better understanding of who she is, what she's doing, and where she's going, and it all falls under her passion. So, not to waste any more time, Sha, go ahead and tell us who you are.
Yeah, thank you, Philip, for having me. I'm Sha Sparks. I am the Chief Excitement Officer of Sparks of Fire International, and I am a fearless living coach and speaker and trainer, author, and podcaster.
So, what does that mean? To
What it, yeah,
No,
what
go
it,
ahead.
what it means is I have learned to see where my fear shows up, how it shows up, whether it's trying to control something, like we were talking before we got started, how control something or overwhelm, or maybe it's overthinking, or it's possibly a lot of us, what we have is this inner voice that is really negative and we don't even realize it. And so when I can identify that that's what's showing up, then I get to choose on how to walk through it, not walk around it, not walk over it, not walk under it, but you have to walk through it. And there's different tools and tricks and techniques on how to do that, and really just be able to release it in order to move forward.
What I found out, there are absolutely no shortcuts to it.
Right. Absolutely. You're
You
right.
got to put in the work. And because for me, in everything that I do, it's about the individual. Because I gratefully has have been able to study self-awareness, emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and see how much it impacted my own life. I
Mm.
mean, it did a 180 for me, and that blew my mind. That
Mm.
why did I make it so difficult?
Yeah.
And realize that it was my perceptions, my thoughts, my beliefs, my everything of who makes me who I am is what that hindered me.
Mm.
Well, actually, my ego and my pride hindered me the most
Mm.
because I've done this. I can't go back and do that. Well, Shay, yes, you can. And
Yeah.
sorry for saying your name wrong, Shay.
Oh, no big
I
deal.
think I said Sha. I'm used. I forget that there's a little squiggly line next to your A, and but to the
It's all
most
good.
part, what type of clients do you deal with?
Yeah, so I primarily work with, believe it or not, men who have been through some sort of trauma, and that can be PTSD from the military, or it can be trauma from an ex relationship. And they are either avoiding their feelings, or they're stuck in feelings, or they're unable to go through it, like we just talked about a little bit ago. And what I do is really help them be able to move through it without hitting their proverbial rock bottom of despair and desperation and depression, and really help them to guide them to move through it in a way that is still in a more, I will say, a more courageous way. And what I really do is help them redefine what alpha means.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Oh, so what does alpha mean to you?
Well, so it is about being that courageous. It's being vulnerable so that that courageous muscle is being built. And the program that I use is actually an acronym, ALPHA, and it stands for awareness, leadership, purpose, hope, and alignment. And that awareness that we've been talking about, the self
Hmm.
awareness, is primarily the first step because it's the biggest step. is oftentimes we're really good at blaming or shaming the other person or circumstance, or, oh,
Yes.
it was because, the house that I grew up in or the neighborhood or, whatever. But at some point in your life, like you said, we have to take that personal accountability, that personal responsibility, and go, okay, I'm the common denominator here. How is it that I can move forward? And, that ego is part of what is the toxic masculinity that's going around these days, right? So we look at it from an emotional intelligence side of like, it's okay that you felt that. It's okay that you thought that about yourself. And let's see how we can direct it in a way that will actually propel you forward rather than m- put you in a place of not moving. Because oftentimes we freeze, we don't go take any action, we're paralyzed. So my goal is to really help people to move forward, whatever that looks like for them.
So you break them out of their uh, ineptitude and
Absolutely. Yeah.
show them that there's more to life, and everything that they're experiencing, they got through it. And that's what I try to do is hey, high five yourself. You lived, I've lived over 18,000 days because I'm 51. So I look at it as I'm winning
Mhm.
because you have a long life and I have a great life. I have a beautiful wife, three daughters that my current wife helped me reestablish communication with because I didn't realize that we were we were saying the same thing but from different perspective or different angles.
Mhm.
And with that, it frustrated us both because we were saying the same thing, but I was explaining it, and
Mhm.
all they wanted to know was just take responsibility. Yeah, I did it, and this is why. Well, we don't care why. We just want to know that you acknowledge it. It happened. Well, yeah, I know it happened. I was there. But when it comes down to it, I found with my wife, we got into a lot of stuff that he said she
Mhm.
heard
Mhm.
and she said he heard because man, our brains process things
Oh,
completely different. And
absolutely.
I think that's what happens when lack of communication, lack of understanding in your family environment. Because I think
Mm.
I was extremely successful in my career,
Mhm.
and but yet failing at home because everything fell apart because all my attention focus was on my work. Do you what's one thing that you find is common among veterans and or law enforcement or first responders that are trying to reassimilate back into being just a normal citizen?
Well, I wanna touch on 2 things actually, if you
Okay.
don't mind. One is, we get wrapped up with the, labels that we put on ourselves, so or that other people put on us. A lot of times we get wrapped up and call it an identity. Well, that's who we
Yes.
are, right? Our rank, our label of father or husband or, wife, spouse, whatever. And then life happens and we're no longer a spouse, right? We're an ex-spouse, or we're no longer a
Yes.
veteran. We're no longer in the military. We're no longer in law enforcement. We're we're Philip, we're Shay, we're not chief master, whatever anymore.
Yes.
And that is a scary place to be. And so when you're able to really look at yourself from the standpoint of those were labels and not your identity,
Mhm.
and that goes in that self-awareness, we really look at how do you identify with yourself? And then we go from there. You are not your career. All of those things are career. Most of them, I should say, are career, right?
Yes.
And so it's not about what you do, it's about what you be, which is a
Yeah.
different understanding. And then you mentioned communication just a little bit ago on what he said, she said, that what they understood, that type of thing.
Hmm.
And I think that's in all relationships, whether it's business or, family relationship dynamics, we have to come from a place of understanding and willingness to learn rather than a place of giving orders. And for me, that's what I've learned the most, that coming out of a military situation, they're used to either giving orders or receiving orders. And
Hmm.
so now they have to really think for themselves to understand to communicate. And most of the time, and this isn't a veteran thing by any means, this is a people thing. Most of the
Yes.
time, people don't even understand that they're not being heard or understood by the other person. So then they have to back that up one more step and go, okay, well, you're assuming what's you that they understood you or that they heard you instead of asking a clarifying question to dive a little bit deeper. Maybe even ask them to repeat what it is that you just said. And then coming from it from the intention of, curiosity and not a a place of emotional readiness that you're ready to react, because a lot of times we're so in that reaction mode that we're forgetting to respond, and understanding and listening and willingness to ask those clarifying questions come from a place of response. So I would say that's
Hmm.
one of the biggest things, along with the identity. And the communication goes along with, our inner communication. What is it that we're telling ourselves? Now that we're shifting and things are different, are we helping ourselves or are we hurting ourselves? Are we empowering ourselves or disempowering ourselves by maybe we're beating ourselves up by the stuff that we say, oh, I'm a failure because I'm no longer X, Y, and Z. And that's not the case at all, right?
Yeah, well, that's what I found out when I transitioned.
Yeah.
Uh, and you know what? I went from National Guard to active duty to the reserves
Hmm.
because I finished out in the reserves. But I tell you one thing, doing it in the reserves and National Guard was 5 times harder than it was
Mm.
on active duty because then that's all you have to worry about your job on active duty. Well, when you're in the reserves or the National Guard, or, you have to balance both.
Yeah.
You have to work 5 times harder because you have your family, everything else that you normally have in the civilian world, but yet you have this obligation and a contract that you sign that you'll go in all the deployments and it, I know guys that spent most of their reserves or guard on active because of
Hmm.
deployments.
Sure.
And you got to think our military is so small now, they tap into the reserves and the National Guard like they've never have before.
Hmm.
And what that does, we forget that we have family members back home
Mm.
that are going through their own lives and trying to do it. And that's where the disconnect for me happened with my own family because I was out, I was separated. I didn't understand what was going on when I wasn't there.
Hmm.
And unfortunately, and they told us that don't, you got to look at it as your spouse or your partner or whomever has, while you've been gone, they've been living their life. So they didn't stand still in one spot
Mm.
and wait for you to come home. No, they're living. And it's the same thing with when I transitioned back into the civilian world, I was behind the power curve because a mass majority of them spent decades creating their network.
Yeah.
And all my network was in the military.
Hmm.
And then when I got out, I looked at it and it was like, you feel like you're alone now because you used to have all the support system. I called it, I call it institutionalized.
Mm. Yes.
Because if you really look at it, why are they throwing so much money at prisoners
Mm.
to transition when we have military people going through the same problems?
Right.
Because if you look at it, you get used to the structure and everything. Once you get adapted into it, it it flows naturally. But when you try to interact with the civilian that don't understand it,
Mm,
or they, I notice a lot of them get put off because they think we're aggressive. And it's not
mhm,
aggressive; it's just
mm,
confident. Well, they view it as cocky,
mhm,
and a lot of hiring managers. And when we go in, we try to. I mean, we'll go in with the briefcase and dress for a simple job, and then we'll get to, oh, you're way overqualified.
mm,
And after hearing that for an extended period of time, you actually start to believe it.
mm. Yeah.
And then the more I've talked to other veterans, they're going through the exact same thing.
Mhm.
And why don't we all come together and
Mm.
make it easier for each other and say, hey, and that's where the emotional intelligence and mindfulness is. Because I think a lot of veterans mindlessly go through life
Yeah.
and they don't think of the wake they created behind them.
Mm.
And until they stop and then they go, oh, look back and go, did I do that? What has been your experiences dealing with veterans?
Well, I love that you said about the overqualified. There is something to be said that your skills are adaptable, and the my point of view of being non-military, but my point of view of just and all the veterans that I've spoken with is the disservice that the military gives in the transition period to quote unquote be gainfully employed, whatever that's supposed to mean, right? And it's like, okay, that's great. But is there meaning? Is there purpose? Because as you know, veterans have been given meaning and purpose for their entire career.
Yes.
And so for me, that's where I saw this huge lack, this huge issue. And I think back to my dad that when he was drafted to the war in Korea, had he had a system in place to really help him find his purpose, where a lot of people were kind of discovering that. And, like you said, they've already spent their career figuring that out, going along the journey where you guys had such a one track mind of getting up, doing that structure, the same thing that you did for all those years in the military. So, what does it look like now that you're out to really find and create that purpose? And for me, part of that thing is to find the transferable skills and understanding that structure is something that you're used to and that the rest of the world has no idea what structure means, has no idea what systems mean or anything like that. And so you have to kind of go into most job interviews with that mindset. Like they may not understand where you're coming from,
Hmm.
and that's okay. And it might, as frustrating as it might be, that might not be the route for you as a quote unquote gainfully employed employee. And maybe the route is to really discover what your own skills are and how to utilize them in your own business.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I've also seen to where you're employed, but you're underemployed.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
mean, it's hard to go from the military and then it feels like everybody expects you to start over.
Mm,
Or you got a lot of the senior leadership thing or that have been out of those direct uh, act, the ones that are actually doing the work. The senior people, they don't do anything. They're more of a think tank.
mm,
And when you look at it, a lot of the senior NCOs and senior officers, they're teaching self awareness to senior officers.
yeah.
There's nothing for the enlisted or the junior officers when they transition because you spend all your time, months, weeks, years learning your job.
Right.
And so the military does a great thing to break you down, strip you down to nothing, and then rebuild you.
Hmm.
Okay, well, you rebuild me for that mission. Now I have to go tear down all that stuff because you know what? Most mass majorities have the skills to kill people, and that scares the heck out of civilians.
Mhm.
But then again, any I don't put anything past anybody,
Mhm.
and it's all up to you and how you see and perceive the world that you can make a difference.
Well, and I think that's it right there. So I fully 100% believe that when the student is ready, the teacher appears, and when the teacher is ready, the student appears. And I believe that that's literally what we're doing at this stage in life. Whenever you're thinking about what's next for me, whether that's because you've transitioned out of something or you're thinking about transitioning out of something like maybe employee to entrepreneur or military
Yes,
civilian life, you have to look at, okay, what is next for me? And what do I really want? Which a lot of people don't even think about. So you may have to be underemployed for a while in order to really figure out what that dream like that life that goal life looks like.
yes,
And a lot of people are like, oh, but Shay, that's so like woo woo and fairy and not even realistic. And it's like, you're putting limits on yourself, number one.
yes.
And number two, um, you've never even thought in that direction of what a goal life could look like because you've been given your path and your duty every day. So to think like that is even a scary thought. And I was working with one client of mine, and he was so used to working in corporate America, if since literally he worked his way up from
Yeah.
high school. And I said, "So what does it look like outside of that?" And he's like, "Outside of that? Well, I don't know. I would just get another job." So he was thinking he would just shift from one company to another. And I said, "Would that be fulfilling to you?" And he's like, "Well, I don't know." And I said, "Well, great. That's a great place to start. So why don't you look at your dream life and what does that look like? Who are you around? What are you doing? What is filling you up? What is filling your cup, so to speak?" And he's like, "But Shay, that's not even realistic. Why would I look at that?" And I said, "Well, first of all, that's your limiting belief that you're thinking it's not realistic. But second of all, you haven't never even thought like that. You've been in this structure of corporate America for and it was 20 something years. For so long, you never even considered something outside of your comfort zone, which is where everything
Hmm.
is, right? Outside of that comfort zone.
Outside that comfort zone.
Mhm. And when we're ever thinking like that, that's when fear shows up. Is like, "Oh my gosh, I need to do something new." And most people, they don't see it as, "Oh, I'm scared to this." Most people say, "Oh, that's that negative inner voice." That's how their fear shows up. That limiting belief, that's how the fear shows up. So once we got talking more, he then went home and started writing it down, journaling, which I highly recommend everyone do, is to
Yes.
hold your thoughts captive, right? Write it out. Even the bad stuff, get it out of your head and see what you write, cuz sometimes we don't even know. We have no idea what's going on in our mind. But he started daydreaming and writing it down of what his end game, what it looked like for him to maybe retire early.
Hmm.
And he had never even thought about retiring early until then. Started working with me, and then he started to go, "Wow, I could see what I really love to do." So he's a financial guy. He loves helping people pay their bills on time. He's a daily money maker, daily money man. He helps people basically pay their bills. And he started this side gig while he was in corporate America, and he's in the process of figuring transitioning out now. He's done so well on his side gig after all these years. So you just never know when you get sparked in the right direction of what's going to come out of it.
Yeah, and that's what I've been doing. I with my clients and everything, getting them to understand your happiness is not my happiness. And or your wife's happiness or your kids' happiness, because we all have different things. But to the most part is actually sitting down and thinking about it.
Yeah.
And because with me, I have ADHD. So my thing is I can hyper focus when I'm
Mhm.
learning something.
Mhm.
And I go so deep, I want to know the origins and how it all was created, because everything we know in our world, somebody's thought of.
Mhm.
I mean, if it's not chemistry, it's nuclear, it's all that. Phenomenal. We
Yeah.
have more access to information than we've ever had in human history.
Right.
And it's for you to go, well, I don't know where to start. Well, start with you. And that blows people's minds.
Mhm.
Uh, I've always been a caretaker. I've always had someone to take care of. And what are you doing when you're an empty nester?
Mm.
And this goes back to all, I mean, you think of these professional athletes,
Mhm.
their whole life they spend at that sport.
Yeah.
And then they retire at 28.
Right.
Wow, they've got a lot of living left.
Yeah.
And they're wealthy. And I must admit, I think normal life is uh, basically what you make it. I was going to say mundane, but no. And that's the thing about it is you have to take the initiative for
Mhm.
yourself. And if you wait for someone else, you'll be waiting forever.
Yeah.
Because do you do it on their terms or on your terms? And
Well,
too
I
many times we focus wrong.
well, I love that point. We have to focus on ourselves first because where when we find ourselves in an identity crisis, it starts with I for a reason,
Yes.
right? Yeah.
Yep. It's me.
Yeah.
And because like with it, I love law enforcement. I always will. But you know what? I've been, I've done everything you could.
Yeah.
And I look at it as, all right, God's given me more time to live. And now what do I want to do next? And I thought about it. And the more I learned about self awareness and emotional intelligence really, really became an eye opener for me,
Mm.
because everything was a battle. I took things personally that were way out of my control.
Mhm.
And I was just angry.
Yeah.
And now I'm filled with love and peace and
Mhm.
harmony. And I look at now going, wow, I prioritize things completely wrong.
Mm.
And but you get into that, you don't even realize you're doing it until you stop.
Right.
And a lot of people can't get out of that mindset. That's why they wear military t-shirts, shirts, and they can't get out of that. Well, all you're doing is alienating yourself from everybody else
Mm.
because of the aggression and pride and ego. You got to throw those out the window.
So for me, I was a victim and never thought of
Okay.
myself as a victim. But I was a victim of abuse, addiction, anger, depression, low self worth. I was bullied and became a bully. And it wasn't until I got out of an abusive relationship that I really saw how I had just been surviving up until
Yes.
then my whole life. Right now, here I am in my mid 30s, and I was like, holy cow, I just been waiting to die. What? Like, really? And I didn't even get the grasp of what living, like what you said in the beginning, what living actually meant, not let alone thriving.
Yes.
And when I started down that path of mindfulness and self-awareness and really being able to tap into myself and stepping out of my comfort zone and peeling away the layers of the onion that I am, that we all are, and practice being vulnerable and seeing that I'm going to be okay, I'm safe no matter what I do, and that I'm not a victim of my circumstance, I'm a victor of what happened to me,
Yes.
and
And
I'm going
that's
to
what
make a victory out of what I do. Yeah.
outstanding. Well, we're getting close on time. Wow, this has been a phenomenal conversation. And I can't believe 30 minutes is already up. So, real quick, what's the lasting words you want to say in closing?
If you find yourself in an identity question, I won't say crisis, I'll just say question. You're questioning what it is for you to do next. Look within and ask yourself, what is it that I really want? And daydream about it. Give yourself some time. Maybe, maybe it's a 30 minutes time slot every week that you just start to daydream. And literally, it doesn't have to be written down. You can just take 30 minutes and dream what would my life look like outside of where I'm at right now. That's what
And
I
that's
would
part
say.
of the mindfulness,
Yep, absolutely.
uh, and coming to peace and learning what your triggers are and how to take them away from everybody.
Yeah,
And that was my bigger problem. Everybody knew exactly what button to push and when to set me off.
yeah.
My ex-wife was a puppet master.
Mm,
She knew exactly when to do it, and it always looked in her favor.
mm-hmm,
Because as soon as I got angry, I lost.
mm,
Period. No matter if I was 100% right, I
yeah,
was wrong the way I handled it. And I understand that now. And if I would have known that 30 years ago, my life would have been different.
right. Yeah,
But
it's
hey,
that.
I greatly appreciate you coming on. I
Mm,
look forward to having more conversations with you. And I think definitely, I don't believe, me personally now, I don't care about competition. I believe in collaboration
yes.
because I'm not better than anybody else. We just have different views, and I'll give you the best experience that you for your money.
Mm, amen.
And
Well,
yes. All right. Well, thank you very much and have a wonderful day.
thank you,